I'm Sebastian St. James. ETFs are nice, but are LICs actually better? Are listed investment companies, LICs, the hottest trend? And should you throw out your ETFs and go with LICs? In a previous video, one of my viewers asked, what are your thoughts on LICs versus index investing? Chris's question had several parts to it, and we'll address the other parts in a future video. The thing about LICs is they're very niche, and probably nobody else in my viewership would actually be remotely interested in them. Hi Sebastian, great vid. Thank you very much. Thoughts on big traditional LICs like AFIC and Argo for fully franked dividends to fund retirement? Oh, so it appears my viewers are demanding to know more about LICs. Well, they've come to the right place. Far from being the hottest, latest trend, LICs are actually old, really old. The oldest LIC in Australia, which is Whitefield, WHF, is 98 years old. That's right, LICs are actually older than I am. Exchange-traded funds, on the other hand, have been available for just over 20 years, coming to Australian market in 2001. That's right, ETFs in Australia are actually younger than I am. So do you trust the traditional 98-year-old product or the more innovative 22-year-old one? That I'm able to tell you. An LIC is a listed investment company, specifically company, keep that in mind. And here's Argo. Here's an example of a company on the ASX, which just happens to be a listed investment company. Some people think of LICs as being like a mutual fund. And in a sense they are, but strictly speaking, as a structure, they are a 100% company. So they have more in common with BHP and Berkshire Hathaway than they do with a normal ETF. For example, ARG, Argo, and it has things like cash flow, earnings, dividends, and book value. It's 100% a normal company on the ASX. So sure, LICs actually do invest in other companies. I mean, that's their purpose, but always remember the structure. It is a bog standard company, and therefore can act like normal companies do. On the other hand, what is an ETF? It's an exchange-traded fund, so definitely not a company. All right, so there's a different structure, but beyond that, are there differences between LICs and ETFs? Yes, and it's a very major one. LICs are actively managed. There you go, there it is. Actively managed means at the whim of the management staff, and it's a particular management staff that they have at the time. They get to choose, they get to make up all the rules, and often it's not rules, it's discretionary. Whatever they think, they have a look, they think, oh, this stock is better, no, this stock is better. That's right, the management team of the particular LIC has 100% discretionary powers to invest in whatever they want to invest in. Now, they may give a statement of the types of things that they might invest in, but they're not rules-based. They're actively managed. So what you might find in 10 years' time is the LIC doesn't even have the same staff choosing their stocks. That's something to factor in. ETFs, on the other hand, are passive, or they're actively managed. Ooh, that's right. An exchange-traded fund speaks to the actual structure, and therefore the rules that govern that structure. It doesn't actually speak to whether it's active or passively managed. Here, what are active ETFs? Oh, active ETFs are a type of exchange-traded fund, an ETF, that has a professional investment fund manager or team making decisions about the underlying investment portfolio allocation. So there you go. Most people think ETFs are index fund. And it's true, most of them are, but they don't have to be. But let's see what the question was. What are your thoughts on LICs versus index investing? Okay, so we are going for passive ETFs. Fundamentally, this comes down to your beliefs. I will ask you 2 questions, and based on that, we can determine whether LICs are an option for you or whether you should totally avoid them. Let's see which statement you agree with. I believe that research has shown that cap-weighted index funds overwhelmingly outperform active managers. Do you agree with that statement or not? Or the second statement, I believe that carefully managed active funds can, on the whole, select the good stocks and avoid the bad stocks. In Australia, every 4 years we have the census, and there are 2 questions that census asks. The first one is, what is your current religion? So you answer that question. And the second one is, do you believe in passive or actively managed funds? Okay, so the census doesn't really ask you that, but it should. Because just like a religion, what you believe fundamentally changes the way you invest. If you believe that nobody can really beat the market, then LICs have no place for you, because they're actively managed funds trying to beat the market. Do you know, in the same way that ETFs tend to be index funds, but they don't have to be, they can be actively managed. In theory, LICs, listed investment companies, could be passively managed. They could follow an index. There's nothing about the structure that means that they can't. However, I'm not aware of any that do. But if you had a little look at the list of them, right, their benchmark, right? WCM, Global Growth Limited, code is WQG, and its benchmark is the MSCI, All Country World Index, excluding Australia. Oh, hang on, that really sounds a bit passive. They follow an index, right? That same company, WCM Global Growth Limited, says on its own website the company provides investors with access to an actively managed portfolio. So there you go, they mention an index, but no, they're not actually following it. On the other hand, if you believe that buying the whole market will give you guaranteed mediocre results, then you might be interested in trying to outperform it using an LIC. There are two ways of potentially investing in an LIC. Option number one is actually to treat the LICs just like ETFs, which means putting large amounts of your portfolio into these LICs. Here, take a look. So you might say my portfolio is 30% WCM, 30% ARG, and the remainder in WHF. And these are all LICs, and there you go. My job is done. I'm fully invested in the market. Well, yeah, via LICs. The other approach is to look at LICs as companies, regular companies, like any other company, like BHP, Commonwealth Bank, CSL. Oh, there's a couple of LICs, in which case there's a fundamental difference with the amount that you actually place in them. So let's say you have 60% in IVV, which is an ETF, and then you say the other 40%, I get to choose the stocks myself. So you have 5% in BHP, you choose 5% in CBA, and then you notice an LIC that you like, so you stick in 5% in WHF. Is there a different risk profile in these two different approaches? Yes, it's an entirely different risk profile. Do you know that companies, all companies, actually actively managed? Google, Apple, Facebook, BHP, Commonwealth Bank, actively managed. So if you buy LICs as regular stocks rather than massive parts of your portfolio, then really the risk is the same as buying any other companies. Potentially less in a sense because they're carrying a basket, so you're not relying on the price of coal at any one particular moment. So if you're buying small amounts of LICs, diversifying across that and a whole lot of other shares, then there's no real fundamental problem with that. On the other hand, if you're going to take massive slabs of your money and shove them in LICs as if they're really just another name for an ETF, then that we need to look into much further. When it comes to LICs, there's something else that you might be confusing it with. LICs versus LITs, LICs versus LITs. Well, one is the listed investment companies, the other is listed investment trusts. Aha! Both listed investment, but the structure is actually different. What is this difference then? Are they both actively managed? The answer is yes, they are. Okay, so that part doesn't change. Listed investment trusts. Well, trusts by law must be pass-through vehicles, so all profits, like dividends, must be distributed each year. And trusts typically don't pay tax. The tax obligations are passed through to the unit holders, which would be you if you held the LIT. Listed investment companies, on the other hand, well, their companies can retain whatever they want. They are not required to pass on anything to you at all. And companies typically do pay tax, and their tax could be passed on to you as franking credits. Aha, interesting. Well, that's a bit of a difference there. ETFs, are they more like LICs or LITs? Well, ETFs will distribute everything in full, such as franking credits, interest, foreign income, dividends, and capital gains, minus their fees, of course. Strangely, ETFs, these days anyway, can modify your cost basis, which effectively changes the price at which you bought the ETF for tax purposes. ETFs are much more like trusts than investment companies, which don't have to pass on anything if they don't want to. Based on my descriptions, you should already have in your mind whether LICs are actually an option for you or whether you're dead against them. Take this optional retaining of their dividends. If I invested in IVV, which is the S&P 500, and the management team thought, no, look, we'll just retain the dividends for a while, we won't distribute them, I would be very upset with that. On the other hand, listed investment companies can and do play active games with your dividends. That's right, they choose not to distribute them. Oh well, it's up to them. But is there a reason for all this whim? Yes, there is. Start with LICs are actually trying to outperform the market. That's why it's all arbitrary. As far as the dividends, they're not trying to pull a fast one on you. They're trying to smooth out the dividends over time. Take a look. The LICs may receive from the companies they hold, let's say 5% dividend, and then the next year 3%, and then 2.5%, and then 7%. What it does is it actually bottles them up and pays you in the first year 4%, and holds on to the other 1%, and pays you 4% and 4% and 4%. Tries to smooth things out over time. Do you know that Chris, who's the original person who asked the question for this video, actually has a superpower? Here, take a look. Oh, he has a yellow medallion, yes. So it means he's been a member, and he's been a member for 2 months, right? So when did he ask that question? Oh, look at that! 2 weeks ago! 2 weeks? 2 weeks? I have people who've asked questions a year ago, and they're still waiting in the queue. I will get to them, but I've got to work down through everybody. Where's this 2 weeks business come from? How does he waltz in and go straight to the top of the queue? Well, that is because he's a member. My channel members actually get priority. So if you'd like to get that perk and a whole lot of others, hit the join button below this video and become a channel member. Chris said, I read an interesting book on LICs and dividend growth investing. That was interesting. Historically, LICs were just like a vehicle because ETFs didn't exist. These days though, an LIC is actually seen more as a dividend play because some people like to be denied their dividends. Oh, I mean, having their dividends smoothed out. One thing that does concern me though is the high fees. They charge like a wounded bull. Let's take a look. This is the annual amount that they charge. 1%, 1.5%, 1%, 1%, and 1.23%. Wow. Okay, they're pretty high. LICs actually charge like they're a luxury product, like they're Gucci, and therefore you're going to pay 10 times as much just because of the name. 10 times as much? Surely I'm making that up. No, LICs on average charge around about 1%. On the other hand, ETFs are more like 0.1%, a factor of a tenth. Another concern I have with individual LICs is their lack of diversity. So WCM, let's find out how many stocks they hold. 30 to 40 companies. Whoa, okay. Now, if you're holding this LIC as a small part of your overall portfolio, that part is not really a problem. It's a concentrated play. On the other hand, if you said to me, I'm going to take one ETF, say the S&P 500, and I'm going to put all my investment money into that, well, fundamentally, I don't have too much of a problem. It might be the right choice for you. On the other hand, if you're going to take one LIC and stick all your money into that, I would say that fundamentally, the risks outweigh the benefits. Oh, who are these handsome and less handsome chaps? These are the current investment managers of WCM. Are they brilliant in their field? Maybe, I don't know. But they are the faces, the people who are actually making the decision. One issue with LICs is their track record is not necessarily repeatable in the same way. We've had a look at the faces. Let's say they've been there for the last 10 years, and that's the track record you look at. Now, in 10 years' time, will those same people be actually working for the company and picking the same stocks? Well, we don't know, because their staff, they may actually move on. So fundamentally, an LIC can have continuity problems because it's all active management. On the other hand, what if the management team of IVV, the S&P 500 ETF, all up and left at once? Would I be concerned? Well, no, not really, because in the first place, they don't actually create the index. There's nothing that they're doing other than religiously following it. Who does? Well, that's S&P Global. So would I be concerned if the management team of S&P Global actually changed? No. Once again, not particularly, because everything is rule-based. So as long as they follow those rules, it doesn't matter who is doing the managing at the time. It's a process, and they follow it. All right, I've given you some facts. Now, what's my opinion about whether LICs are right for the average investor? Are LICs fundamentally good or bad? Well, LICs are actively managed products. If you want to buy LICs like any other stocks and hold them as a small percentage of your portfolio, such as 5% per holding, I have no inherent problem with that. On the other hand, if you want to buy LICs as a major part of your portfolio, then they are full of risks. Why? Well, they're not rule-based, and therefore they're dependent on the skill of the particular managers at the time. You can't guarantee that for the next 20, 30, 40 years. LICs are a dated product. They made sense before ETFs, in the same way that outdoor toilets used to make sense. When I grew up for the first, say, 5, 6, 7 years of my life, we lived in the country and we actually used an outside toilet. Would I use an outside toilet today? No, it's a dated product. And besides, they smell. I'm not going back there. LICs have really expensive management fees, so they're around about 1%, whereas ETFs are closer to 0.01%. Now, it does depend on the ETF. You'll find that IVV is about 0.04% here in Australia. On the other hand, the Nasdaq 100, no, closer to 0.5%. Yes, it thinks it's an LIC. Index funds are proven investable products. LICs are less so. Index funds are based on buying the market. LICs are based on the skill set of the individual managers. ETFs are based on a set of rules, such as market cap weighting, that can be back-tested. LICs are arbitrary and less predictable. So, should the average investor in Australia actually use LICs? If they're going to be a small part of your portfolio, then it's not going to be a problem. With stock picking, should you put 80% of your money into Apple and nothing else? No, definitely not. And therefore you wouldn't put 80% of your money into an LIC. On the other hand, if you're going to use LICs as an ETF replacement to put most of your money in, then the risks probably outweigh the benefits. Alright, so that's good, but there's one group of people who fundamentally are not really addressed by the average ETF. Dividend investors. People who say, I want to focus specifically on dividends, but I feel that the average ETF doesn't really give me what I want. S&P 500, its dividend is tiny. And if you're going to be a dividend-focused investor, well, it's probably not the best ETF to give you that. But do you know what? There is another. Here is the XJO versus the XJTF over the last 10.1 years. What is that? The XJO, oh, that's the ASX 200 versus the ASX 200 plus dividends, that's the total return part, and franking credits. Right. Over that time period, the ASX itself, just the price, has returned 59.6%. Add in the franking credits and the dividends, and it is 179%. But it's actually like night and day. ASX price only has had a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate, of 4.73%. If you add in the franking credits and dividends, then it goes up to 10.7%. So as you can see, the price for is actually less than half of the return. So the bulk of the return is actually dividends. So if you're specifically after dividends and the average ETF doesn't provide them for you, you don't really have to go for LICs because arguably the Australian market is a high dividend yield play. Do you know there are several index funds, ETFs, that are actually specific to dividends? Oh, so they're not all market cap weighted? No. As long as they follow a set of rules and they are in a structure of an ETF, ETFs can actually go many different places. But there are a certain number of things you need to look for. First of all, it should be rules-based. It shouldn't be actively managed. And it should hold a large diversified portfolio of high dividend paying stocks. So we're not after a concentrated portfolio of 20 stocks only. And the ETF's total return shouldn't underperform the general market, or at least if it does, then certainly not by much. Oh, this ETF gives me 8% return. Super high dividends, yes, but if it loses 20% in the process, that's not really a very good deal. Now, if you want to go one step further, instead of looking at ETFs, or even LICs for that matter, you can look at individual companies. And then you need to know what are the highest dividend paying stocks on the ASX in 2023. Click here to find out. Or if you've seen that, click here.